to be I found it to be a very interesting opportunity to talk and share, the little I know about finance. Because finance, I think, is rather daunting, or it's a scary thing for most women. And, rightfully, it should not be that way, but it is definitely. There are many reasons why generally women think they cannot understand finance, or they don't know how to manage finance, or they think it is really not their job. Maybe their spouse should do it, or their son should help them, or things like that. So it's scary, but I will try to through the discussion, provide you some very basic information that I think might be of use to you, that I hope it will be of use to you. So the topic that Promila ji had provided me was basics of budgeting. And again, this is a hot topic for everyone, because, I think it's very similar to what we would do, Promila ji, if you think about it, in like, managing, let's say, just your kitchen and your meals for your family, right? So first you have to figure out how many people are going to eat. Then you're going to figure out what do you have in the refrigerator, what do you plan to make, what do you not have, should you go and buy it, should you have two side dishes or one side dish, and if you are going to need to buy something, so you don't have tomatoes and you want to make a side dish with tomatoes, then you have to go out to buy tomatoes. And then the next decision is, where do you go and buy tomatoes? Where is a good price for tomatoes? Where is the quality good? And so on, right? So I think this is something that we are conditioned to do. But when we think about finance and budgeting, we don't think in these terms, but it's actually very similar. So if you think about what budgeting involves, it is basically trying to figure out um, how much money do you have coming in every month or every week into your account or into your purse, and B, how much do you need out of that money coming in? How much do you need to set aside for expenses? So you need to know both of these things. And this is very similar to saying, how many mouths do you have to feed? What are you going to feed them? And what do you have already that you can use to prepare your meal? So that is what you have already, or what you're going to buy from the store, that is your income. And what people are going to eat, your lunch menu and your dinner menu, those are your expenses. So that's how you can very easily think about income and expenses in that fashion. So one is coming in and one is going out, and whatever you have as a net, or whatever remains after you have spent the money, expenses, is your saving. And saving is actually a very good thing, because it helps you when you have um, unforeseen circumstances. So circumstances like, losing a job, losing a spouse, health issues, anything that you didn't plan for, that you have to spend and you don't have any time to collate money at that particular instance. So that is your unforeseen circumstance, and savings really helps you with that. So with that, Promila ji, let me pause. And is it? I don't know. Were you planning to ask any questions, or should I just go on?
So yes, Veena, kindly go on. We did receive about 3, 4 different questions, and I'll put it, once you have finished the presentation or the information that you had.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So continuing then, I will focus on income. Then we will do expenses, and then we will do budgeting, and then we will go to savings. So when you think about income, again, I said this is very similar to what do you have in your refrigerator, what do you need to buy from the grocery store, so that you have your inventory, or you have all the stuff that you need to prepare your lunch. That is your income, right? And so you may be a working professional, in which case maybe you have a regular income. Let's call it a regular income, because you may be deriving a salary. So I work, I'm a finance professional. I go to work every day, or I log in every day, and then I know pretty much how much money is going to be, how much roughly I can expect every month. And typically, for salaried employees in the US, the pay frequency is every 2 weeks. That is typically the pay frequency. If your organization is different, then you might already know your pay frequency. And then some other people are not salaried. They may get, maybe you're running a business, in which case each day looks different, but every day, hopefully, you get some income. That is, you get, maybe you're selling something. And then if you're selling, the revenues that you get from your sales are your income. And then for a salary professional, after you put in your day's work, after you put in 2 weeks' work, whatever goes into your bank account is your income. Typically, salaried people mostly set up their income to go into their bank account directly, because this is the best and the safest way to receive your income from your employer. And the employer typically also deducts tax at source, so that you don't have to, so that one little effort is, already taken care of. So sometimes employers are set up to do that. And so whatever is net, that goes into your account if you're a salaried employee. And if you're a business professional, you're probably managing those everyday fund flows. So whatever you get, you keep a tab of it. You probably have some sort of program that you've invested into. At the end of the day, you tally, here is how much of sales I've had. And then, I've had to also buy new things. So I have paid for certain services, I've paid for certain goods. So that is your expense. So we'll move to expense next. So you should always know roughly how much you are making in income every 2 weeks, every month. And income, we talked about salaried employees, we talked about business people. There is a few other kinds of income. Some people who do a lot of investment. So suppose you have a bank account that earns you a certain interest, or you have invested in certain securities that pay dividends. So then that is also income, but not everybody does all of that. So in the least, you should have at least some salary or business driven income. And then you probably have, and definitely all of us have, expenses. So with that, I will move to expenses. Now, this one everybody is familiar with. Many people don't know how to assess their income, but everybody knows and feels the pinch of expenses. So if you think about, a single adult, then the adult definitely, needs a place to live. So housing is a very important item of expense. And then you have electricity. Then you have, in today's in a world, you have to pay AT&T or Comcast for Wi-Fi, correct? So you have Wi-Fi, then you have gas, heating, then you have waste management, then most likely you have a car. So then if you have a car, you have insurance, you probably have some parking. And then if you're not a single person, if you're a family, then you can double all of that, or how many ever cars you have, however large your house is, then all of that is expense. Plus maybe you have kids, then it's their expenses. Maybe they have some expenses related to their school. They have activities that they go to. They do Kumon, they do extra math, extra science. So all of that is expense, and everybody understands expenses, because we are mentally attuned to keeping a tab of, oh, I pay $75 for this, I pay $100 for this. That is probably too expensive. This is probably too expensive. So those are all your expenses. When you think of your expenses, it is useful to bucket them into two or three different categories. So the first category you would say is expenses that are compulsory, that you cannot really do without. And those expenses are housing, then you have, car insurance, parking, gas, waste management, anything that you need to just live. And then you think of kids, sending kids to school, any, school related expenses. Those are all mandatory because you want them to succeed and, and thrive. So all of those are mandatory expenses. And then you have this other bucket, which you can call discretionary expenses. All those are nice to have. So occasionally, you may go out to watch a movie. So that is a discretionary expense. If you didn't watch a movie, you save that money. But you like to do that every now and then just to take your mind off work and to have a good time. So you go there. That is discretionary. So occasionally you may travel. Maybe you have relatives in Florida. So you go to Florida, that is a discretionary expense. You can also do a Zoom call or a WhatsApp call with your folks in Florida, but you like to go there actually and visit them. So that becomes a discretionary expense. And you have control over that discretionary expense. And then some of us, what we do as a family, we like to go out to share a meal. So there is this new fancy Indian hotel that has opened up, right? So their menu is very nice. Let's go out and have a dinner there, right? So that is discretionary expense. You can also have that same dinner at home, but you choose to go out and eat. So that is discretionary expense. So two types of expenses. One is mandatory. So three types actually. One is mandatory, which you cannot do without, like house, electricity, Wi-Fi. One is discretionary, which is like eating out, going to the movies, traveling, all of that is discretionary. And then the third type of expense is the toughest one. That is the expense that is unforeseen expense. I talked about this a little bit before when we started the call. These are things like suddenly, a family member falls sick or has an accident, and then you basically lose that person's income for a couple of months, or you need to spend on hospital bills all of a sudden and you hadn't even planned for it. So that is a very tricky type of expense to navigate. The mandatory expense, I think, if you think about it, you can actually write them down. So you know how our mothers and fathers used to do it. They used to write things down in little diaries. So they always knew $600, 600 rupees I have to pay for rent every month, right? So they always knew that amount, or 2,500 rupees I have to pay. They knew that every month. They knew for Hindu newspaper how much I have to pay, 40 rupees every month. I knew that. My parents knew that, and then they used to write it down on a little diary. So most of the mandatory expenses, you will be able to actually record them any way you want. Some people prefer pen and paper. Some people put it on the computer. These days, it's very easy to do. There are many tools available like Excel, Microsoft Excel. You can just open a small Excel sheet, put in all your expenses. Then every time you go to a movie, you can record those expenses as discretionary. So maybe, the first thing you do is record your income. So you say, oh, twice a month I get salary, so I'm going to put that in. Then I'm going to put in all my mandatory expenses. And then, oh, by the way, I ate out twice and I watched 2 movies. That is my discretionary expense for the month. And then hopefully we don't have any unforeseen expenses, but there will be some months where something or the other will happen, and that becomes unforeseen expense. So the nice thing about tracking your income and your mandatory expenses regularly and having a very good understanding of that is that when you understand your income and your expenses, you can do the net. You can do income minus expense and figure out if you're living within your means, if you are making enough to meet your mandatory expenses. And then if you're making, hopefully, or most of us are in that bucket, we are making more than enough to meet our mandatory expenses. Then whatever is left, $200 a month, $300 a month, out of that, maybe $100 a month you can allocate to discretionary expenses, because everybody needs to have, we all should have fun. All work and no play makes Jack a very dull boy, right? So then you all have to have fun, and then it also impacts the state of your mind. The discretionary expenses, going to a park, or going to, having dinner every now and then outside, so that your wife doesn't have to cook or you don't have to cook, that is great. You can do that. So you can, out of the $300 that is extra between income and expense, maybe $100 you can allocate to discretionary expenses. But the $200 that remains needs to be saved. And again, I like to take the example of our grandmothers and mothers. They had a very, very simple way of saving. If they went to the store and they bought, some wheat flour, some rice, some vegetables, and they got some change back. In those days, we only operated in cash, right, in India. So when we got some change back, that change, they would bring it back and put it in a little purse or in a little dabba, in the kitchen, and they would keep it. And that would grow, day after day, week after week, slowly that dabba would grow. So that is your saving. And that you can do very consciously. Once you conquer those steps, understand your income, understand your expense, and then make sure you're in a comfortable place. Income minus mandatory expense is a very comfortable delta for you. Make sure you get there. And then once you get there, the delta from that, there is some discretionary that goes, and then the remainder becomes your saving. And there you have many different options. Again, if you are a salaried person, then most likely in the US, every organization offers 401k plans. That is basically, you don't have to do much, just enroll in a 401k plan. The organization also will match up your contributions up to a certain level. So if you contribute $100, your organization may contribute $4 or $6. So instead of 100 being invested, your 100, you're actually investing 106, and 6 comes from the employer. So that is a way to save. Some other people these days, CD rates are very high. Interest rates are high these days compared to where we were in 2021 or 2020. So now the other interesting option to save is to take a little money from that, the delta that you have. You take a little money and say, okay, this $2,500, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in a certificate of deposit for 12 months, and I don't want to touch it because I think I want it to grow over this 1 year. You can do that and put it, and basically you have to forget about that money for 1 year. So if you have that level of comfort that, that the delta is big enough that you can take some and put it away for a longer time, and do that. For children, there is education savings plans called 529 plans. So again, you can use some of that delta that you have to save for your children. And this is actually really nice because you also get a tax reduction on it. And then you basically are preparing for your children's future. So I think there's no bigger reason for us to rejoice than that. So they are getting education. We are saving for their education. So you can do that. Many options are available for saving. But in order for us to get to that saving spot, right, we have to first cross those first 2-3 milestones. We have to understand what is the income we get, where it is coming. Is it going into our bank account? Do we have access to our bank account? Do we know our login and password? Can we check that every month, every 2 weeks? Expenses. There are ways to even manage mandatory expenses. For instance, this is also very familiar. Our parents used to do it all the time. For instance, maybe house, right? Are we living in a house that is too big for us? Or are we living in the right locality? Should we move to a different locality where the house is probably at a little bit more cost effective? Are we paying too much in rent for this quality of amenities that we are getting? Are there other options out there? So always you can try to figure out if even the mandatory expense is pegged to the right level. One very good example is insurance, right? So if you go to Progressive's website, they have an option where you can actually compare, I think, different insurers' rates. You can put in your specifications and compare. So you always shop. Even if you have to have insurance, you don't have to go to the most expensive insurance provider. You can choose. And America and every developed country gives you that option. There is a benefit of choice. You can always choose where you put your money. So mandatory expense, try to make very wise choices with them. Some people, it's very common. Some people, what they do is they buy really large houses, or they pay really a lot of rent for a very fancy house, when they can manage with what is a level lower should also be fine. All you need is safety and comfort, right? You don't need to be living in a palace for that. So manage your budgets within your income. That is the best formula for long-term success. See, most of us are immigrants. We lived in India for some time. Maybe we came here. Some of us maybe we were born here. But either way, we have to stand on our own feet. And then we should try not to burden other people around us. So then the best way to do that is we get to a point of self-sufficiency. So you get, a steady job, or you work very hard to build a very good business, a business with integrity. Your clients love you, and there are regular clients who come to you. Your income is steady more than irregular. And then once you do that, and then you understand your expenses, then savings will come naturally to you. One of the big issues here in the US, when I came here 23 years ago, I was a little surprised that people were not saving as much. People were making a lot of money, but then there is a tendency to live from
Is
paycheck.
it related to culture, Veena? Is it related
Yeah,
to culture?
bit culture. I think the savings rate in a lot of Asian countries is much higher. And I think the reason for that is how our parents lived and how our grandparents lived. I think we basically rely on education and salary, and there is a tendency to think that we have to provide for the next generation and the next generation. Some
So,
of them,
is it relevant to say, Veena, say, even if the savings, like whatever may be the rate for savings, either way, a budgeting basic is still required?
it is still required. It is still required because even so, savings again is extra, right? I think even to meet that mandatory expense level, that budgeting piece is very important. Understanding your income and understanding your expenses and what those levers are. Are those expenses all mandatory? Do you have any room there to move them a little lower? And then discretionary, what is the wisest use of your discretionary budget? Is it a movie? Is it eating out? Is it both? Is it traveling and eating out and movies, or is it one of the three? And so those types of questions, I think, thinking through those, and maybe if you do that for a couple of months, then it will become practice.
Yeah, so we have a few questions. So this is from a person. She writes, she's a female spouse and is not working, and she is not aware of all of the mandatory expenses because a lot of the bills are paid by her male spouse. So her question is, she gets a defined amount for, say, household expenses. So what is the best way for her to do the budgeting, because of not knowing all the mandatory expenses? Do you have any recommendations?
So I think firstly, if it is possible to have a discussion, open discussion with your spouse. If you are in a position to do that, I would start there, because finance is a very, like, budgeting, money and finance is a very tricky thing. Firstly, it's I already said most women find it difficult,
Mhm.
but the other thing is that this is also a reason why there is a lot of stress in marriages. If you think about marriages, in some relationships, both spouses go out and earn money, right? And they contribute jointly to the family. However, maybe one spouse controls all the finances. Maybe the woman is like taking a back seat there, saying, I will just, allow you to do everything. And there are pros and cons with that. Maybe your day is very busy, you have to take care of the kids, you have to cook, you have to whatever, right? So you're really busy and you're delegating that task, and you think you have like delegated that task to your spouse. But the positive is, yeah, you get a little bit of time and everything. A little bit of negative there is that you have earned all the money, and I think it is fair for you to know how it is being used. So
Mhm.
always have a little bit of a voice in that process, and you can start small. If you're thinking of starting a budget, do it with your household expenses first. you know Try to find efficiencies. Hopefully you're able to drive to the grocery store, right? So some people, what they do is they are like, they cut coupons, or
Mhm.
they keep track of coupons, and that's a way to even make a budget within the household expenses budget that you have. But the next thing you can do is, maybe you see an ad for insurance, and then you can talk to your spouse about it. How much are we paying for this insurance? How much are we paying for let's say Wi-Fi? Should we move from Comcast to AT&T? AT&T now has Uverse. Should we do that? So get knowledgeable about that. If you have access to the internet, these things are somewhat easy to do these days. In the olden days, even like 20 years ago, you have to have like paper things sent to your home, and then you have to sit down and compare. Now you just type comparisons on Google, you will get all the rates.
Yeah.
So you can move to that gradually. But the first thing I would encourage is even having a conversation with your spouse to say that I'm interested to actually contribute to this process. I don't want it to be that I'm very passive about it and you're doing everything. I think it is in our joint interest that I can help you with this, and I can probably be a set of eyes to make sure that we are making the right choices. I think it
Yeah.
starts there.
So in some, whosoever is the primary financial keeper, he or she needs to ensure that all of it is transparently shared for the benefit of the family. And awareness is important. Should something happen, for some unforeseen circumstances take place, the other partner is able to pick it up and then manage accordingly. Right.
Yes,
So
that,
I have, yeah.
yeah,
So
go
one more
ahead.
question, a couple of more. So you mentioned about the you have the mandatory and you have the discretionary, and then you have something unforeseen. So in any budget, what percentage do you recommend that families or anyone working need to keep aside? Is it like 5%, 10%? Like any recommendations for the unforeseen things which may come up?
So the recommendation, I think there is some rule out there I saw on the internet, like 5:3:2 or something, like at least you should save that much. But
Mm.
I would say anything that you can do is better than nothing at all, right? So
Mhm.
it can be something that you do in steps. If you set a high target, then you may get disappointed if you don't reach that. But the first thing is to understand how much. So if currently your 70% of your income is mandatory expenses, then that cuts down the room, right? It cuts down the room, versus if you had 50% of your income goes to mandatory expenses, then you have a little bit of room there, wiggle room, to say, okay, then I can layer on some discretionary, and then I can save a
Mhm.
robust amount. So I
Understood.
think you have to, in this case, Promila ji, I think
Mm.
cutting the coat according to your cloth, right? So that is the
Mhm.
important thing. So first understand how much is your income, and and design your budget according to that, and go in steps.
Mhm.
There is no reason to panic at all. So long as you are comfortable today, you can continue to be comfortable. But what you can
Mhm.
do is, around the edges,
Mhm.
make progress, and then you will get to a spot where it becomes like it becomes like second nature. It becomes more like a practice habit.
To everyone watching, if these questions were also part of something that you had wanted, as Veena mentioned, understanding the basics of budgeting is extremely important. If you are the primary finance decision makers, share it with your significant other, because it's very important that as a family, if you're part of a family, both should be aware of what is coming in, what are the expenses, and how you should be able to manage. One last one came in. You mentioned about salary expenses. Does this apply similar, say, supposing they have a home business or they have a small business? What about that? Is it best to keep the two budgets separate? Like, is a business separate and then there is a personal income separate? What is your recommendation?
So I think I would start by keeping them separate, because I think what happens is your business budget is supporting. I suspect that it supports other employees and your other families, right? Your personal budget is what comes to you hopefully from the business. That is your budget. If you in other words, if you manage the budget for your business wisely, then you have a positive income there that then transfers to your personal budget. It can transfer as a positive. I think if you're a small business owner, there is probably some lot of provisions within the tax code that allow you to take some tax credits and benefit that way. You can show more expenses and everything. So hopefully you're managing that in an intelligent way. But if you do that correctly and if you do that wisely, then what that does is it bolsters your personal income. And those two are different, because your business budget supports your employees' families as well. And so you have to keep them somewhat separate. And both of them are equally important, because your personal budget supports you and your family. And only if you're healthy and happy and you're able to contribute to your business can your business thrive. So, there is that linkage is there, and you cannot forget the linkage. They are very closely linked, but still distinct, I think.
So those were the only questions right now. So anyone who's watching this, I'm sure this you must have benefited. But should you have any additional questions for Veena, you can send an email to info@sanjeevaniforyou.com, and Veena can guide you through what may be the possible question. Thank you so much, Veena. It has been extremely helpful, and especially for a lot of people who are beginning their career and starting to earn, or new households. It is going to be a stepping stone to manage finances. So thank you so much for your insights and all the helpful suggestions and recommendations.
Thank you for the opportunity, Pramilaji. I'm so delighted to be of help. And as Pramilaji mentioned, if you have any other questions, please send it to the address that she mentioned, info@sanjeevani.com, and then I'm happy to attempt to provide answers. Thank you so much.
All right. So thank you. And hopefully we will be back, Veena, next month with another topic of related finance. All right.
So much.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Stay warm. Bye.
Bye.